Welcome, everyone. My name is Robin Lucas. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Grassroots Advocacy Manager at AAUW. First, a few housekeeping notes before we get into the content of our webinar today. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next week. And if you have any technical questions today, please type them into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and AAUW staff will be happy to assist you. But if you have any question about the substance of today's webinar, please drop that into the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many as we can in the discussion portion at the end of the webinar today. So with that, we can go next slide. Thank you. So for today's webinar, I have joining me Barbara Price, co-chair of AAUW's Public Policy Committee, and Megan Kissel, the Senior Director of Policy and Member Advocacy here at AAUW. Barbara and Megan, welcome. Let's kick off the webinar and the floor is yours.
Next slide. Hello, everyone. So AAUW is nonpartisan, but we've always been political. We have a long history of creating social change through public policy efforts, like endorsing legislation. Political work can be characterized by shared values, working toward a common goal that is best for the community. AAUW takes political stands and influences public debate on critical issues based on the values in the member-adopted public policy priorities. Put simply, being political is a way to influence legislation and regulation through government or public affairs. Being nonpartisan, AAUW will work with any policymaker from any party who cares about our issues and shares our goals. Next slide. AAUW's public policy priorities, first and foremost, are member-driven. The adoption of AAUW's public policy priorities is the cumulative process of involving AAUW members nationwide. Every 2 years, members can review and suggest changes to the public policy priorities, and that occurred this year. And you can see on the slide here that the APPC, the Association Public Policy Committee, develops them. A draft goes to the membership for comments, and then we look at them again, and then the members get to vote on the public policy priorities. Next slide. So how do we use these public policy priorities? Well, they are broad for a very specific reason. It's impossible for AAUW to address all the issues that might affect women. We cannot cover everything. However, by having a broad view of issues relevant to women and girls, we can pivot when a new issue arises that might address our mission. The public policy priorities offer a guide when new legislation is introduced at the federal or state or even local level. Does it address one of our issues? Is there anything in it that might not fit with our biennial priorities or what we believe? The public policy priorities also provide planning and work guidance for staff as they decide the best use of their time, talents, and AAUW resources in moving our agenda forward. Next slide. So our public policy priorities are a statement of what we believe and are consistent with AAUW's mission to advance gender equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. Basic to all AAUW's public policy efforts is the understanding that true equity requires a balance between the rights of the individual and the needs of the community. There are statements on what AAUW believes about public education, the economic, social, and physical well-being of all persons, the right to privacy and freedom from violence, the need to end white supremacy and address structural and systemic racism, and that global interdependence requires national and international policies against human trafficking and that promote peace, justice, human rights, sustainable development, and mutual security for all people. The biennial action priorities offer specific ways to support a strong system of public education that promotes gender fairness, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and to address the barriers and implicit biases that hinder the advancement of women and girls. It also looks at how to achieve economic security for all women and how to guarantee equality, individual rights, and social justice for a diverse and inclusive society. Next slide. This year, we received 31 comments about the public policy priorities. Most comments addressed only one issue. 12 comments supported the public policy priorities with no changes at all. Other comments cover the areas of education, equity and inclusion, gun violence, sexual violence, the ERA, reproductive rights, and economic issues, most of which are already included in the public policy priorities. After a careful review, the Association Public Policy Committee proposed adding specificity regarding AAUW's commitment to addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion by adding age and income. They then went to the board for approval and then to the members to vote on the changes. And the changes were approved by 96.3% of voters. Next slide. So why do we choose specific legislation? Well, at the federal level, at the beginning of each new Congress, AAUW staff talks to allies and partners about what may be introduced in the new session. While there's hundreds of bills that are introduced, we use the following criteria to determine where to invest the bulk of our resources: staff time for lobbying and strategy development, materials preparation, letters to Congress, grassroots organizing, lobby corps, and action network emails for federal issues. We have chances for passage. A major consideration, given the makeup of the Congress, is to consider the chances that the legislation might pass and how broadly it addresses our issues. For example, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act remained a bipartisan bill with wide support until we finally reached the finish line in December, and it passed. We also look at the distinct AAUW contribution. There are some issues where AAUW has a depth of knowledge. For example, AAUW research on specific issues can guide our decision on legislation, such as our deeper in-depth research on student loans and the simple truth on pay equity. We also work with our coalition partners, who are other organizations that have maybe more expertise in a particular area than we do. We sign on to letters and stay informed. We inform our members at critical junctures when and if legislation may begin to move that fits with the one of AAUW's public policy priorities. And then at the state level, the state public policy chairs can go through a similar process of getting feedback from members and coalition partners to determine what issues are realistic to work on in their state. AAUW national staff can also help provide technical assistance and resources for state-based efforts. Now I'm going to turn it over to Megan to look at some very specific issues that we're looking at focusing on in the coming year.
Thanks, Barbara. And welcome to everybody who's been able to join us this afternoon. My name is Megan Cassell, and I started in March as the Senior Director for Policy and Member Advocacy for the organization. So it's my pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon and look forward to this as a beginning of a conversation. and thrilled to know that there is this much interest in learning more about our public policy positions and how we're utilizing those. And I did just want to highlight something that Barbara had just mentioned about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That's actually a bill that AAUW and our members, we've been working on for a number of years. It was really exciting for the bill to actually be passed and signed in December, and it actually goes into effect next week. So this is something where we have made a real impact on the lives of women, the lives of people who can be pregnant, that there's now going to be a very clear rule for employers that employers must provide reasonable accommodations for pregnant workers. So I just want to say on behalf of everybody at the national office, thank you for all of the constant calls and letters and conversations that you've had helping to raise awareness of one of those issues that we've been working on. So taking a look at, all right, where are we going now? As many of you realize, we're at the beginning of a session of Congress. The Congresses are in 2-year sessions. So we're in the 118th Congress. It's quite a divided body out here in DC. We certainly have a number of challenges in terms of the relationships between Democrats and Republicans, but that doesn't mean that things can't get done. At the national level, our focus really is taking a look at our public policy agenda. And as Barbara just outlined, where do we have an opportunity for a unique contribution for AUW at the national level? Where have we historically been? So our priorities for this year are really looking at women's economic security, and that includes student debt and the affordability of college. Some of the specific things, since we are at the beginning of a session of Congress, we've seen a lot of bill introductions so far this year, including the Paycheck Fairness Act, which actually was just had a markup in a Senate committee yesterday. We've also seen 2 bills on a paid leave, the Healthy Families Act, which was also heard in the Senate committee yesterday, and that would provide 7 days paid sick leave. And the Healthy Families Act, oh, I'm sorry, I've just reversed those. The Healthy Families Act would provide sick leave, and the Family Act would provide paid leave. The combination of those 2 bills would provide short and long-term leave for women and families. There's also been a couple of pieces of legislation regarding affordability, of college affordability. We have been supportive of doubling Pell Grants, and we have been, and hang out, stay with me here, we've been opposed to congressional efforts to overturn the Biden administration's payment pause for student loan payments. And there's also an issue that I'll get to more in the courts about student debt relief. But this is a priority for us because for women to be economically successful in the future, we want to make sure that women are having a good education and that they're not always continuing to graduate into a pay gap. And this is why these two are incredibly connected. So that's some of the things that we see on the congressional front. And I did just want to point out that tomorrow is the anniversary of Title IX. And we actually have 2 Title IX related bills that AUW has supported that are being introduced between today and tomorrow. And that would be the Gender Equity in Education Act and the ALERT Act, which would increase accountability at the college level when discussions of harassment are filed. So a lot going on. This is pretty typical for the beginning of Congress. I expect that we will see a number of other bills on a lot of our issues coming up and continue to be filed and introduced over the next several months. And I want to be realistic that this is a tough Congress. This is a tough environment for some of those pieces to move. So we are certainly seeing we're certainly seeing a lot of work that's needed to be done. This is where we always will need your help to continue to elevate these issues. I mentioned that the Paycheck Fairness Act and the Healthy Families Act both had a markup yesterday in the Senate, and yet without continued work, without continued voice from AUW members and coalition partners, we still have we still have a very tough time of getting these moving forward. Some of these bills will take years, and that's where the tenacity of our members in this organization really comes into play. Could move to the next slide. I want to talk about some of the other work that we're doing that's not in Congress, but still that we're still working on here. There's a lot of activity with this administration with, what are their opportunities with executive orders? And as many of you may have seen, that last summer, we did see some proposed rules to strengthen Title IX. This was really fixing some things that were eroded under the previous administration. We also saw this spring, the Department of Education proposed rules on athletics under Title IX. About 2 weeks or so ago, we've heard from the Department of Education that these rules will not be finalized until about October. And even though we consider this a very friendly administration, it's still our job to hold their feet to the fire and really encourage this administration to make sure those rules are not only finalized, but they're implemented as quickly as possible so that our students aren't going without the protections of Title IX. Also on the executive front, we've seen really positive proposed rules that would eliminate the use of salary history for new workers with the federal government. This might sound sort of wonky, but this would be an enormous change. The federal government is the country's largest employer, and this would really set a standard. There are many states that have taken really positive steps on pay equity issues, and this would be one. Having this happen at the federal level, having this happen for all federal employees would really be a game changer and set the stage and kind of raise the bar for the states that haven't quite come up yet. And if we go to the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court. And I do see that I want to acknowledge that we do have some questions that what we're going to do is we'll talk about the Supreme Court, talk about how folks can be involved, and then have a conversation with all of you. Drop the slides and actually have a conversation with folks. But I did want to flag for folks that the other branch of government is incredibly important this year, and that's the Supreme Court. Many of you may have seen that there's a number of cases that we are watching and that affect our issues. About a week and a half ago or so, we saw the Supreme Court take a positive step to affirm the Voting Rights Act. We have several cases that we are actively watching, which have not received decisions yet, which anytime, quite frankly, anytime between now and the end of next week, probably next week, we will see decisions on 2 cases on the executive order that was issued last year that would make college more affordable, is aiming to make college more affordable by having a pause on student debt repayments and having a limited, sorry, just lost my words for a moment, would actually have student debt relief. We're looking at affirmative action cases that we've seen other steps taken in California on this issue, but we don't know what the court is going to say about whether affirmative action can be issued, can be used, race-based pieces can be used in terms of college acceptances. So we're actively watching that because we really firmly believe that a diverse education that encourages everybody to get higher education is the one that's going to be what helps us move forward as a society. And we are also looking at a case that is really looking at LGBTQ protections and the rights to discriminate or not. And this is something that is also a core of what we believe in, that everybody deserves the same chances. Equity isn't equity unless everybody has the same opportunities. What I want to do is I want to pass it over to Robin, talk about how folks can get involved. And then what we'll do is go through several of the questions that are coming through in the chat. But first, Robin, you can take it from here.
Thank you. All right, so it would not be an AUW public policy webinar without talking about, okay, what can you do now? So what can you do as an individual? This is a place where AUW can really help you out with your advocacy. A great place to start, the ground floor of advocacy, so to speak, is emailing or contacting your legislator. This is a way to communicate with elected officials and tell them your opinion. Our 2-minute activist platform is how AUW provides our advocacy community with topical, action-oriented opportunities to engage. We link you to one of our action pages on that topic that includes background information on the issue, what exactly we're advocating for or against, and then provides a letter template for you to contact your elected official with that automatically will send it to them for you. This all takes under 2 minutes. That's the name. We're not the boy who cries wolf. So we do come to you when we know that your voice can be impactful and provide you with salient messages through these 2-minute activist alerts. So much like Barbara was saying, that it's all about like the likelihood, the chances of, and also is something happening right now. The template letters themselves to elected officials can be customized. We do highly recommend this. So if you add anecdotes, personal information, community impact, since you are reaching out to your elected official as a constituent, they work for you, and hearing from you and your personal perspective is really impactful. For key issue areas, we also collect all of the content that we provide, the action opportunities, that background information, research that AUW provides on specific issues, if we joined a public letter or if we have a press release on it. So we collect all of that into a single location for some of our core issues as an advocacy toolkit. Right now, we have 2 central toolkits, one for pay equity and another one, so for pay equity in support of the Paycheck Fairness Act specifically, and then another one on reproductive rights that does include some information on the Women's Health Protection Act specifically. You can also send your own letters or call your elected officials on your own to let them know how you feel about something, and we really support that as well. We just know that being a part of a coordinated effort like the 2-minute activist program, where we are all working together and they see a groundswell of response about a topic, can really elevate the issue that you care about. So if you want to join Power with other advocates, reach out to your state or branch leadership, please. We have folks that lead your branch and or state that are doing incredible work on a state level and joining with us on a national level. But state legislation, state bills, this is where a lot of the, let's say the real battleground of some of our rights is being fought on a state level. So please reach out to them. The state or public policy chairs or branch public policy chairs coordinate lobby days for you on a state or local level. Or if you're in Washington, D.C. area, you can contact us to join the AUW Lobby Corps, which takes our issues directly to Congress on behalf of all of us. So we've got a few issues here, or a few options here. Next slide, please. And all of that to say, we have 4 of those different locations here. We've got your current legislation and action alerts for the 2-minute activist, where to find public policy priorities, our greater advocacy toolkit, and then letters, comments, testimony, and legal briefs is where you'd find a lot of those public letters that we join in coalition that we'll reference sometimes in Washington Update or on webinars here. So please get involved. If you have any questions, reach out to us directly. If there's something about how you want to get engaged. And then at the end of the day, this year, next year, any election year in your area, please vote. And with that, I will hand it back to our group and we will switch to some discussion. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so Megan, Barbara, we've got some questions, just a few. Thank you all for submitting questions as we went through the webinar. Are there any that are popping out at you first, Megan? I see that there are a few first about how we make decisions, so maybe let's go in order of the webinar for folks so we can go, kind of go logically through what they just listened to.
So let me take myself off mute. I think one of the things that just popped out at me, and Robert can fill in on this, is how do folks know when this is happening? Just starting off with the basics of how do people know what our policy priorities are? And it is a 2-year process. So we have just affirmed the current public policy priorities for the next 2 years. So you won't see a new opportunity to weigh in on the next public policy priorities until next year. That's when we'll kick off the process again. But hopefully folks saw this past spring membership emails that were talking about the voting process of that the policy priorities, the proposals were up on the website. Folks should have received an email with information with your membership link so that you could go and you could vote and you could affirm or raise concerns about this. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible as an organization about where we are in the process and how to weigh in. And Barbara, I'm not sure if you have more to add on about that. Anybody
who's signed up with an email, that AAUW has your email, will get a notice that the public policy, that you can comment on the public policy priorities. That happened in January. And it was 2 weeks, I think, maybe it was extended to 3. And then people can write in and, submit through the website what they think. And then after that, we collect all of them and see what they reference and, how they fit with what we've already done, or because there's a lot of, there were a lot of comments where those things were actually covered already in the public policy priorities. They'd already addressed those issues. And then after that, they go to the board to, if we find something like we did this year with the age and income, and then that goes to the board so that they can approve it. And then it goes out to the membership to vote. And the vote just recently happened in May. And that was the same time that you could vote on the officers for the association as well. So it won't happen again until, because these public policy priorities will now be for 23 through 25. So it won't happen again until we're ready to look at the next 2 years.
I found this question really interesting. So speaking of the public policy priorities, has adding age and income changed or added to the national legislation that AAUW advocates around?
It hasn't immediately. And part of that is taking a look at what bills are coming up. I will say there was an Older Workers Protection Act that has been introduced. We've not yet taken a position on that. And I'll explain our rationale behind this. When we saw the bill has been introduced, we've reached out, we've taken a look at whether we've taken a position on the bills in the past. We've also reached out to our coalition partners. This bill in the past from the advocacy community has a lot of support from AARP. So we've reached out to AARP and we've asked them for their assessment as to, does this bill have legs? Is this bill viable to pass this year? And right now, at least at the beginning of this session of Congress, the assessment is this bill is not actively moving. So at the moment, we're not putting our time and energy behind that bill because the feedback we're receiving is that there wouldn't be an opportunity for a distinct contribution from us. And in this session of Congress, it is unlikely at the moment, it is unlikely that that bill is moving. So those things are assessed on an ongoing basis. And just because that's the case on June 22nd of 2023, that doesn't mean that that will be the same. Sometimes circumstances change with a bill and they might begin to move. So we'll continue to be in touch with coalition partners as some of those things. It's a very fluid process to take a look at things like that. So currently, those two additions to the public policy agenda haven't vastly changed what we're working on at the federal level, but it does give us more flexibility, both at the federal and the state level, to keep an eye on what's coming out next.
And I think if we were just trying to make sure we were covering all bases with diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know. And I know I get questions a lot from legislators about how does the pay gap affect women in retirement? And so, you know, thinking about age, that's one of the issues that, and of course it does, you know, when you don't make as much as other people, that can affect your pension and that can affect your Social Security. So, you know, those are things that we need to watch and think about. And, you know, there's always talk about Social Security and should it be cut and changed and things like that. So this would again be a broad approach that if things came up, like Megan's talking about a specific piece of legislation, we could pivot to know that we wanted to support that.
Speaking of having topics versus specific legislation, in the priority list, I have a question. The ERA was not on your legislative priority list. Why not?
It is actually under the I just happen to have a copy of all the priorities right here because I wouldn't go anywhere without them. Under the third biennial priority to guarantee equality, individual rights, and social justice for a diverse and inclusive society, AAUW advocates for passage and ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. That's in it's the last one on that list.
Yep. I really appreciate the person who asked the question though, because we do get that question frequently. And honestly, it is one of the few, if only, pieces of legislation that has been and remains in our public policy priorities document. Everything else is topic specific, but the ERA is the special one that does get named specifically. So thank you for that answer, Barbara. All right, we can switch to a little bit more of how we make decisions and how we operate. So we talked a little bit about coalitions. Can you, Megan, share some of the coalitions that AAUW belongs to? It's more which ones do we operate in, and which ones are we most active in?
Sure, and Robin, I invite you to also jump in on this as well. Working in coalition is really how we're able to be a lot stronger and really contribute to a lot of the work that's being done. There are a couple of key coalitions around education, especially on higher education. There's a coalition that is convened by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights has the very unsexy name of Education Task Force. And we work, and just to give you an example, we work with this coalition at the beginning of the session of Congress, really worked with coalition partners to determine what were educational priorities that as coalition members, we thought would make a significant impact. And even if we don't think they were going to make it all the way within the next 2 years of this session of Congress, what is so important that we really need to make sure that we're continuing to push and move forward. And we have other coalitions that are very specific to student debt. We're working in coalitions that are focused on a number of different coalitions that are focused on women's economic security. So as in a big way, we are part of a network that's equal pay today. And that's actually an umbrella of, as I said, it's a network that is really focused on quite an array of pay equity bills, on paid leave bills, on wage transparency, workplace discrimination. And oftentimes what we'll see is under that umbrella of these big coalitions, there might be separate bill-specific coalitions. Paycheck fairness, we've mentioned this before. We're part of a larger network under Equal Pay Today, and Paycheck Fairness Act has a specific coalition where we're discussing how do we get members of Congress to keep moving this specific bill, and then within the network we think about how are we working with which set of bills are we collectively raising our voice on. And I did want to point out, since I mentioned Paycheck Fairness Act, thank you for the person who submitted the question, calling me out on my DC jargon and referring to a markup in the Senate, which is really just a fancy name for opportunities for the senators within the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in the Senate had an opportunity to offer amendments to these three. There were three specific bills. Committee members had an opportunity to offer amendments to try to change the bills. And that's what's referred to a markup, as opposed to a committee hearing where we would have heard, there would have been an opportunity for outside organizations to actually speak to particular aspects of the bill. So this wasn't a hearing. This was senators actually actively trying to change components of the bills. And I will say that for the Families Act and Paycheck Fairness Act, they got through that particular process completely unscathed, so that the bill that was introduced is still the bill that we're working with. So that's what that bit of jargon was.
Thanks for giving a bit of a summary. We also work broader coalitions that are not legislation specific. So Megan and Barbara both spoke a little bit about student debt. We're deeply involved with a lot of activity around the Supreme Court cases, as well as the recent actions in Congress, at the White House, in the agencies, kind of all around. That coalition works on a lot. But there are also like temporary ones that pop up, say when there's a new Supreme Court justice that's being appointed, we engage on that. So it's kind of, there are specific named ones, there are specific ones that we lead or are co-leads on, and then there are just more, we all work together and we have a lot of different community relationships that will pull together something, and that is still working in coalition. It just doesn't have a name or website. So it's a big part of a lot of the work that we do. I have seen a few questions that are more, I guess, like more specific to our issues, and I think that they're great to ask. So the first one that I saw, and one of the first questions that came in, was, does paid leave include caring for an elderly parent?
Robin, I was actually just taking a look at this exact question, and yes, the Family Act, which the full name of it is the Family and Medical Insurance Leave Act. It would create a self-funded paid family medical leave program. So many people have heard of FMLA, Family Medical Leave. Currently, the guarantee is not for paid leave. That would be unpaid leave. This would switch FMLA to paid leave. And yes, it would include caregiving activities for elderly parents, and for children.
So that's honestly a really great example of how adding age to the public policy priorities isn't just proactive looking forward on how we will engage on bills, but also representative of how AAUW has operated, that we do look at age and the different realities that caring for elderly parents or those of us going into retirement are experiencing, and how AAUW has always been in that space. So it's both backwards looking and forward looking.
Robin, there's a couple of other pieces that I did just want to address, kind of big picture. is that the public policy priorities are not written in priority order. So Barbara had mentioned that, and Barbara, please feel free to elaborate more, but they're not written in priority order because they're meant to have a lot of flexibility, because what is viable at the federal level this year under this Congress might be very different than what is viable in Mississippi or North Carolina or North Dakota. So it's giving our states the opportunity to be as expansive and to take a look at what makes sense given their political realities at their state levels. So it's not necessarily prioritization the way that is written, but at the national level, we do put an emphasis on this for the staff work on issues concerning women's economic security, including the college affordability and student debt. So that's where we're putting our emphasis, because we have a unique opportunity to contribute on those particular issues, given our given where we are today.
Right, just it's a list, but it's not numbered. It's not a numbered list. So any of them can apply at any time. And that's the beauty, because you can use what, in some states, they've passed pay equity bills. They've passed paid leave. In other states, they haven't. So should we eliminate those because some states have passed it? No, that's why they're still there, because other states haven't, my state included.
And I just want to give a shout out, since Barbara mentioned this, to 3 states that passed wage transparency bills this year. So thanks to a lot of folks on this call and partner organizations, Maine, Illinois, and Hawaii all passed wage transparency bills this year. And that is work that is really happening at the state and local level. And that is just a good example of the change that we're really able to make happen. I wanted to elaborate on a question that I see popping up and clarify some of the language that I'm using about coalition and partnerships, because I think that does cause some confusion. When I'm using it, and I should probably be more precise, AAUW at the national level, we do work in coalition with many organizations, and it allows us to have a louder voice. It allows us to weigh in on issues where other partners have their much more expertise on the details of a particular matter. However, we do not engage in formal partnerships with those organizations, which would be more of a documented agreement of terms of the relationship. We're in collaboration I realize that I personally am using the word coalition partner, and I realize that sounds like a partnership, but what I'm referring to is an understanding between organizations that we are working towards the same goal, and we won't use one another's logos or names without permission of the others. So we are not entering into partnerships with the other organizations, but we do work collaboratively on issues where we are of like mind.
So to kind of narrow down this broader public policy priorities conversation, one of our state public policy chairs has asked, with the national public policy priorities being so broad, what advice can we give to states for how to use those to focus in on their own public policy priorities? So how do you navigate between national to state level?
Barbara, I've got some thoughts, but I'd love to, as somebody who's been in this role at the state level and has really had an opportunity to take a look at this, not just from a national perspective, but from a state perspective. How did you take a look at that in Pennsylvania? And what's been your experience of the conversations that you've had with at the state level?
Well, as I said, Pennsylvania is not in the forefront of a lot of this. So we've been focused on getting a living wage in Pennsylvania. Our minimum wage is $7.25, the same as it is nationally. Every other state around us is higher. So that's one of our issues. We've also focused on pay equity and trying to get pay equity in Pennsylvania. And our other big issue is paid leave. And we have worked in coalition with a bunch of other groups around Pennsylvania on the paid leave specifically. And it includes, you know, people from AARP, Moms Rising, Maternity Care Coalition, you know, a disability coalition, et cetera. And we're all working together to get those kinds of laws passed that will help everybody. And because it affects everybody in different ways in those coalitions, and then we're able to speak to that issue from that point of view. And we've taken the public policy priorities, the national ones, and we've developed ones for Pennsylvania so that we have ongoing ones that we, and we do it in the off years. So it'll be next year that they'll be reviewed in Pennsylvania. And that's how we, you know, being guided by the national public policy.
Oh, I think Barbara might have just froze.
Oh, no.
But just to elaborate on what Barbara's saying is that there is a lot of flexibility that it's the same process though. Many of the state public policy chairs, and I know many of them are on this call, are having conversations both with their branch membership and other like-minded organizations to have an assessment of what is happening, what's anticipated to come up, you know, what the political realities of that state are, and really determining what to focus on that particular year in your particular state.
I saw a newer question come through on deciding how to engage. So does AUW consider our public policy stances when deciding whether or not to support legislation or court cases? And what happens if a coalition partner wants to push for legislation that doesn't really square up with AUW policies? And I will start that off with, yes, the public policy priorities document is our governing document for how we engage in things. But do you want to take the more detailed version of that answer?
Well, there's a couple of ways about this. Number one, we won't weigh in on things that are not within the priorities. And that means that if staff had a pet issue, if I had a pet issue and it wasn't within the public priorities, then that's not something I'm pursuing. Even at the state level, I know that this is an issue that many people wrestle with. There's always going to be some issue that, for good reasons, but might not be in the public policy priorities or might not yet be in the public policy priorities. These policies have evolved. Over decades, our public policies have evolved quite a bit, and they will continue to evolve quite a bit, but they really are those guardrails that Robin talked about. We do have partners. We work with partners, and sorry, I'm trying to not use word, but we do work with organizations where we do have very different approaches to how we might do something. Just because we work in a coalition does not mean we will blindly go in the same direction as other organizations. I think that there's many different ways to attack some of the issues, some of the ongoing issues that we're working on. And some folks might have a more novel approach that we might not agree with. And it means that we won't show up in partnership on those issues, on those approaches. So just because we're in a coalition doesn't mean we're going to affirm all of the steps that particular coalition takes. And it really is a case-by-case, bill-by-bill decision for everything that we take a look at.
Yeah, thank you. It's the nature of coalitions, you know, we're all like-minded organizations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's always gonna join on every effort. And sometimes that's AUW not engaging because it doesn't align with our policy priorities and the way we think a solution could be reached. Sometimes it's AUW and other partners and other folks in a coalition don't necessarily agree or aren't prioritizing that. Like that is not a part of their strategy and their goals right now. But it doesn't negate like the power of coalitions or the power of whatever efforts people are taking. There are a lot of issues that incremental change is helpful and really important, but some orgs might be like, you know what, no, we want everything and we want it right now, and this is what we're going to advocate for. So it's just a lot of, like Megan said, issue by issue, even specific solution within that issue. And a great example of that is student debt with the repayment pause and with canceling student debt. So some people prioritize that, and AUW is one of those organizations that does.
And there might be tactics that different organizations take that we don't. And that's very reasonable between organizations that are in coalition together. I want to jump to how at the national and state level are we advocating? Because many of you, as Robin walked through, many of you have heard us use our 2-minute activist list. And so I think there's a couple of questions related to this is what are we doing aside from the 2-minute activist list? And on an ongoing basis, AAUW is like our national team. Part of the role is we do join meetings with decision makers. So I've been to meetings up on the Hill. Robin is on an ongoing basis having conversations with other organizations about what kind of tactics can we use to engage members and non-members. How are we elevating issues? So, but we are doing lobby meetings. We are AUW's Capitol Hill Lobby Corps in DC will be back on the Hill in July and will be up on a monthly basis. So it's an opportunity for AUW members to be represented beyond just the staff, but also having that member-to-member presentation of being up on the Hill. And we're doing the same thing we're asking all of you to do, which is to pick up the phone, to send emails, to have meetings with elected officials. And not only is this happening at the federal level, I know that I'm going to speak on behalf of, which I never should do, but speak on behalf of many of the state public policy chairs and let folks know that many of these same things are happening at the state level as well. I know for a fact that AUWs around the country are sending letters up to state officials, having those meetings. And I'm just going to put a plug in for the fact that at the federal level, we are coming up on a 2-week recess, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the August recess. Please, you're going to see some of your elected officials will be having events, will be having town halls. Go to them. Let them know that you're a member. At the state level, many of our state legislative sessions are the majority of them have ended or are ending. And this is a great opportunity to get to know a decision maker, get to know a lawmaker when they are home and when they are off. That truly is the relationship that we are trying to develop at the national level. And that's part of what we're doing to help raise the voice of the membership.
And can I add that the Lobby Corps, the National Lobby Corps, is a volunteer group of members. They're not paid, and they're people from the DC area, Maryland, Virginia, that can go to DC and lobby on various issues. And they do have the supportive staff on a specific issue that they would lobby on when they're there. So, because I saw somebody asked about how could they become part of that. So call Megan.
Yeah, if you're in the DC area, please reach out. This is more of a proximity thing for the frequency and physically being there. But Megan's very excited. Give her a call.
And honestly, right before we jumped on today, I had an opportunity to sit down with one of our branch public policy chairs from Las Vegas, who was in town. So if you are in DC, do give us a call, truly. I will even show you the photo of the AAUW members in the Oval Office when the Equal Pay Act was being signed by President Kennedy. So we've been political for a long time. Somebody actually mentioned on one of the questions, which was, we send out emails and we're asking you to send emails and pick up the phone. Is it too much? Do lawmakers get tired of it? No, be relentless. Absolutely relentless. I will also say at the congressional level, depending on the size of the staff for each office, your letters might be going to different staff members. Do not worry about over inundating them. If we stay quiet, our opposition does not. So there is somebody opposed to everything that we support. Hate to say it, but it's the fact. And when we are quiet, the other side doesn't get that same message. They will be consistent. So we encourage you and invite you to be a constant voice on the side of progress for women.
Yeah, I have two things. I was wondering where that question went. Thank you for bringing it up. Two things on that. One, we want inundation. Like that's the goal of the Grassroots Advocacy asks to reach out to your elected official. Inundation is good because that's showing a groundswell of support or opposition to the issue that we're engaging on. Like Megan said, like they need to hear from you. They work for you. They're there to represent you. And staff also like keep track of how many phone calls and how many emails come through in support and opposition to each issue. Not that necessarily will completely impact a leader's mind on something, but they take it into account because again, they work for you and that's their job. And then the other one, another question that we get commonly, I haven't seen it yet in this thread is, well, my elected official already supports or opposes, like is already in line with AAUW. Like I don't need to do this. I get that response a lot when I send out the action alerts. And that's not true. They really do need to hear that they're doing a good job too. They need to hear that the way that they've been doing and operating is in line with the majority of their constituents and what their state or locality wants. Because sometimes when like all you hear is the opposition, it kind of wears you down and you don't know if you're doing the right thing. So they need it. And so do the staffers that actually, read your emails and answer you and answer the phone calls. They could really appreciate a cheerful, hey, you're doing a good job. Keep doing that. So please engage all the time, always.
And I hate to say it, but champions can waver when they don't know that they're being supported. So some of the best emails or some of the best outreach you could be doing is also to say thank you. I also want to say thank you to everybody because we are a much stronger organization because of our membership. And we have an opportunity to be a much stronger force because you are our members and because you are taking the time on a Thursday afternoon to have this conversation. I want to recognize we haven't gotten to all of the questions, but we will. We've got them recorded and we will follow up with this. We're recording this. We're recording this webinar and Rob and I are keeping track of the questions and we will respond to folks and make sure that this is shared. And one of the things that has come up too is, how are we sharing information? We're always looking for more ways to share what we know from DC with you, share from the states with one another. this is definitely a situation of being stronger together. So we'll definitely follow up with folks. And I also want to say thank you to Barbara Price, because Barbara has been the co-chair of the Association Public Policy Committee and has just made a stellar contribution towards the organization, towards the Public Policy Committee, and is a really good example of somebody who says yes and steps up and has really gone above and beyond. And I just want to express my thanks to you, Barbara, because I think this is maybe your last official act as the Association Public Policy co-chair. So thank you very much from all of us here.
And thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I am a public policy junkie, I admit it. And so, you know, it's in my heart and I love doing it. And I like making change. That's, you know, that's going to benefit. I have 2 daughters and, you know, I want their futures to be even better.
Absolutely. And if you take anything away from today and you still have more questions, please reach out to your state public policy chair. They really want to hear from you. Got a lot of questions about it. Reach out to them. They want to engage with you too. Thank you so much for joining today.